On January 17, 1990, the sweltering Brazilian sun baked the pavement of Vila Esperança as students filed into classroom 8B for their afternoon literature session. They waited, first with impatience, then confusion, and finally with growing concern. Maria Elisa Santos, the town's most beloved teacher, never arrived. Her weathered leather satchel sat abandoned on her desk, a dog-eared copy of Machado de Asis's Dom Casmurro peeking out from within, but of the passionate 45-year-old educator, there was no trace. It would be the last time anyone in the small countryside town would see her desk occupied, her chalk-dusted hands gesturing excitedly, or her knowing smile acknowledging a student's breakthrough. Maria Elisa Santos had vanished without a word, launching a mystery that would haunt Vila Esperança for the next 2 decades. Before we dive into this mystery, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you think happened. Your opinion could be the key to understanding this story. The morning of her disappearance had begun like any other. Witnesses later recalled seeing Maria cycling through the town square at sunrise, her silver-streaked braids swinging behind her as she waved to the bakery owner setting out fresh pão de queijo. The scent of those cheese rolls and coffee had filled the air as townspeople started their day, unaware that their community was about to change forever. She stopped by for her usual coffee, no sugar, and we talked about the upcoming literature festival, remembered Carlos Mendes, the bakery owner, his eyes distant during interviews. She seemed normal, maybe a little preoccupied, but who isn't these days? How could I have known those would be our last words? Maria had taught her morning classes, leaving teenage students buzzing with discussions of Brazilian modernism. The school janitor, Pedro Oliveira, remembered hearing her humming softly as she erased the chalkboard between sessions, the fine dust catching in the shaft of sunlight that always slanted through the classroom's western window at that hour. At lunch, she declined an invitation from fellow teachers to join them in the staff room, saying she needed to prepare materials for the afternoon session. This was the last confirmed sighting of Maria Elisa Santos. By 1:15 p.m., when she failed to appear for her class, students had already begun whispering. By 2:00 p.m., the principal had called her home. By nightfall, with thunder rumbling in the distance and the sticky heat making search efforts unbearable, the entire town knew something was terribly wrong. "We thought maybe she had a family emergency," Principal Regina Duarte told investigators, her typically stern demeanor cracking slightly. But her house was undisturbed. Half-finished tea on the counter. Bed made. It was as if she stepped out for a moment and just never returned. The police investigation yielded frustratingly little. No signs of struggle at her modest home. No unusual bank activity. Her ancient Volkswagen Beetle remained parked in her carport. The only items missing appeared to be a small suitcase and some personal documents. Interviews with neighbors revealed nothing unusual, just the normal routines of a dedicated teacher who lived for her students and her books. What happened to the woman whose passionate teaching had transformed this forgotten town into a hub of literary culture? Was she taken, or did she choose to disappear? And why would she leave behind the worn leather satchel she had carried for 15 years, the one containing the essays she'd promised to return that very afternoon? But what if her disappearance wasn't an isolated incident? What if it was connected to something much darker lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful community? 20 years would pass before anyone would learn the truth. A truth that was hiding in plain sight all along, silently waiting behind the classroom's dusty chalkboard. January 15, 2010. The midsummer heat was just as oppressive as it had been 20 years ago when Luisa Cardoso stepped through the doorway of classroom 8B. Now, 35, with her former teacher's position temporarily assigned to her, she felt the weight of memory pressing down as heavily as the broken air conditioner's tepid breath. The substitute teacher's fingers trembled slightly as she placed her own leather bag, unconsciously similar to Maria Elisa's, on the same wooden desk where her mentors had been, abandoned 2 decades earlier. "It's just a classroom," she whispered to herself, though the goosebumps rising on her arms suggested otherwise. The investigation into Maria's disappearance had gone cold within months. Some said she'd run off with a secret lover. Others whispered about mental breakdowns, witness protection, or even suicide in the dense forest that bordered the town. Without evidence, theories had multiplied like the wild orchids that grew on the school's outer walls, abundant, colorful, and ultimately rootless. What pulled Luisa back to Villa Esperanza wasn't just the temporary teaching position. It was the unshakable feeling that she owed something to the woman who had once told her, "You have a mind that refuses to settle for simple answers." That stubborn curiosity had driven Luisa to become a literature professor herself. Though plagued by constant self-doubt, despite her colleagues' recognition of her talents. As students filtered in that first afternoon, Luisa couldn't stop staring at the ancient chalkboard. It had been there in Maria's time, one of the few original fixtures in a room that had otherwise been modernized. Its wooden frame was warped slightly at one corner, creating a barely perceptible gap against the wall. Did anyone ever look behind it? She wondered, dismissing the thought immediately. Of course they had. The police wouldn't have overlooked something so obvious. The first day passed in a blur of introductions and syllabi reviews. Luisa found herself unconsciously mirroring Maria's teaching methods, asking questions that led students to their own discoveries rather than providing easy answers. Several times, she caught herself standing exactly where Maria used to stand, gesturing in the same animated way her mentor once had. "You remind me of her," said an elderly custodian who appeared at her doorway after the final bell. "The way you pace when you're thinking. She did that, too." "Did you know her well?" Luisa asked, surprised. The man, Pedro Oliveira, according to his name tag, shrugged noncommittally. "I've been mopping these floors for 30 years. You notice things." He hesitated before adding, "She wasn't afraid of making waves, that one." Not everyone appreciated it. Before Luisa could ask what he meant, Pedro shuffled away, his mop leaving damp trails on the corridor tiles. That evening, as golden sunset light streamed through the classroom windows, Luisa stayed late organizing materials. The distinctive scratch of chalk against board had always soothed her, and she found herself absently drawing quotes from Maria's favorite authors along the green surface. When she pressed too hard against the warped corner, the chalk snapped. As she knelt to retrieve it, a metallic glint caught her eye from within the narrow gap behind the board. "It can't be," she breathed, heart suddenly racing. Using a ruler from her desk, she carefully fished out what appeared to be an old brass key, tarnished with age. Attached to it was a yellowed slip of paper bearing a single handwritten line. "Some stories hide themselves to stay alive." The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to Maria Elisa Santos. What had her beloved teacher hidden? And why was it only being discovered now, 20 years later? As Luisa held the key in her trembling palm, she couldn't possibly know that this small metal object would unlock not just a physical space, but a conspiracy that had changed the course of countless lives, including her own. The school janitor's footsteps echoed down the hallway as Luisa frantically searched for what the key might open. With shaking hands, she pressed against different sections of the wall surrounding the chalkboard until a subtle click rewarded her persistence. A small, previously invisible compartment opened behind the wooden frame, revealing a leather-bound book wrapped in plastic. "Oh my God," she whispered, the weight of discovery making her knees weak. The diary, for that's what it clearly was, had been protected from 2 decades of dust and chalk residue. Inside, Maria Elisa's distinctive cursive-filled page after page, along with pressed flowers, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be coded messages in the margins. The first entry was dated just 3 months before her disappearance. Luisa only had time to slip the diary into her bag before Pedro's keys jingled at the classroom door. She would need to examine this treasure in private, away from prying eyes and the persistent questions that would surely follow such a discovery. That night, in the small rental house on the edge of town, Louisa spread the diary's contents across her kitchen table. The humidity made the pages stick together, and the aroma of old paper mixed with the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine drifting through her window. The chirping of cicadas provided a rhythmic backdrop as she carefully turned each fragile page. "I fear what I've discovered may force me to make an impossible choice," read one entry from December 1989. "If what I suspect about the land records is true, many people will lose everything they've built." Land records? Louisa frowned. What would a literature teacher be doing investigating property documents? Another entry mentioned, cryptically, "P says the school sits on contested ground. The deeds have been falsified. I've checked the original surveys in the municipal archive. He's right. Someone has been systematically altering documents for years. But who? And why this particular area?" The entries grew more concerning as the dates approached January 1990. Maria described meetings with anonymous sources, late-night visits to the county records office, and increasingly suspicious activities around the school. She mentioned a shadow investor interested in the land beneath the school and surrounding homes. "R warned me again today. Says I should stick to teaching Machado and leave real estate to the professionals. But she doesn't understand, or doesn't want to. This isn't just about property. It's about justice." The most disturbing passage came just 3 days before Maria vanished. "I was followed again today. The same car, third time this week. They know I've been asking questions. R warned me to stop, said it wasn't my battle. But how can I teach my students to stand for truth if I cower before lies? I've made copies of everything. Need to find a safe place for them." But what truly made Louisa's blood run cold was the final entry, dated January 16, 1990, the day before Maria disappeared. "If you're reading this, I either trusted you with my secret, or I am gone." The evidence is hidden where the first quote of our literature festival was painted. Remember, "In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer." The quote, from Albert Camus, had been painted on the town library's outer wall during the very first literature festival, a tradition Maria had started and which, remarkably, continued to this day. As Louisa stared at the final words, goosebumps raised across her skin. Had her mentor planned her own disappearance? Or was this a desperate contingency left by a woman who feared for her safety? Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The town's annual literature festival would begin in just 2 days. Whatever Maria had hidden at the library all those years ago, if it was still there, Louisa was determined to find it. But what if someone else was looking for it too? What if, after all these years, Maria's secret wasn't the only one in danger of being exposed? The literature festival transformed Villa Esperanza completely. Streets normally quiet by 8 p.m. now bustled with visitors well past midnight. Homes displayed elaborate quotes painted on canvas banners, bookstalls crowded the central plaza, and the air carried the mingled scents of coffee, fresh ink, and street food. The summer heat remained relentless, making the paper fans distributed by the festival committee a prized possession among attendees. Louisa navigated through the opening day crowd toward the library, a colonial-style building whose pale yellow walls had been freshly painted for the occasion. The location of the original Camus quote was well documented in festival archives, the building's eastern exterior wall, facing what was now a small sculpture garden. "Looking for inspiration?" came a voice behind her. Louisa turned to find Helena Duarte, the school principal and daughter of Regina Duarte, who had held the position when Maria disappeared. "Just enjoying the festival," Louisa replied, forcing a casual smile. She'd only met Helena briefly during her hiring interview, but something in the woman's carefully neutral expression had struck her as calculated. "You know, this was all Maria Elisa's idea," Helena said, waving a hand at the festival surrounding them. Mother thought it was a waste of educational resources at the time. Now it brings significant tourism revenue to Villa Esperanza. Ironic, isn't it? The things we resist often become our salvation. The comment seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Did Helena know something about Maria's disappearance? Or was Luisa's newfound suspicion coloring every interaction? "I've been meaning to ask you about that time," Luisa ventured. "I was one of Maria's students, you know." Helena's smile tightened imperceptibly. "Ancient history. We've all moved forward." She glanced at her watch. "You should check out the library exhibit on festival history. Very illuminating. If you'll excuse me, I need to introduce our keynote speaker." As Helena walked away, Luisa couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation had been a warning rather than a suggestion. The library was mercifully cool compared to the sun-baked plaza. Luisa moved through the exhibits until she reached the eastern wall, now covered with framed photographs documenting 20 years of festivals. She scanned the oldest images until she found what she was looking for: a faded photograph of Maria Elisa herself, paintbrush in hand, adding the final flourish to the Camus quote. Behind the frame, the original painted words had long since been covered by countless layers of paint. Whatever Maria had hidden here would be equally buried, unless... Luisa studied the photograph more carefully. In it, Maria wasn't just painting. She was standing on a decorative stone bench that remained in place outside. The bench featured carved book spines along its base, and in the photo, Maria's hand rested significantly on one particular book, titled Summer's Secret. When the library cleared out for lunch, Luisa slipped into the garden. The bench looked weathered now, its stone discolored by 2 decades of rain and sun. She ran her fingers along the carved books until she found Summer's Secret, a reference to the Camus quote that would be obvious only to someone looking for it. The stone felt loose. Heart pounding, Luisa glanced around to ensure she was alone before wiggling the carved book. It slid outward, revealing a small cavity within the bench. Inside lay a sealed metal container, the size of a thick paperback. Just as her fingers closed around it, a shadow fell across the bench. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to find that," said a raspy voice. "Question is, what do you plan to do with it?" Luisa looked up to find an elderly man watching her through thick glasses, his pharmacist's coat incongruous in the midday heat. According to his name tag, he was Antonio Ferreira, the town pharmacist mentioned several times in Maria's diary. What connection did this man have to Maria Elisa? And could she trust him with what she'd just discovered? Antonio Ferreira's pharmacy occupied a prime corner of Villa Esperanza's main square, its windows now decorated with elegant literary quotes for the festival. Inside, behind the counter where modern medications were dispensed, lay an archive of the town's medical history, prescription records meticulously maintained for 3 decades. "I don't normally invite people upstairs," Antonio said, leading Luisa to a small apartment above the pharmacy. The space was cluttered with books, antique pharmacy bottles, and, most surprisingly, framed photographs of Maria Elisa at various town functions. "But this isn't a normal situation, is it?" The metal container sat between them on a coffee table, still sealed. The summer afternoon light slanted through Venetian blinds, creating stripes across its tarnished surface. "You knew her well," Luisa observed, noting the prominence of Maria's pictures. Antonio's weathered face softened. "Better than most, not as well as I wished." He picked up a particular photo showing Maria laughing during a school function. She came in often for headache medicine. "We talked about books. I lent her my favorites. She introduced me to Brazilian modernists I'd never read." The wistfulness in his voice revealed more than his words. "You were in love with her," Luisa realized. The pharmacist didn't deny it. "Never told her. Always thought there'd be time." He gestured to the container. Then she started asking strange questions about property records. Who owned what parcels around the school? Historical land grants. She seemed afraid. "Did she tell you why?" Not directly, but she left this with me the day before she disappeared. He reached into his pocket and extracted an envelope, yellowed with age. Said if anything happened to her, I should look for someone asking the right questions. For 20 years, nobody has. Until now. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper, a list of dates and document numbers, with one line highlighted, Original Land Survey, 1932, Municipal Archive Reference, the J478. She made me promise to keep prescription records for certain people indefinitely. Antonio continued, I didn't understand why then. And now I know she was tracking medication patterns. He pulled out a leather-bound record book. The mayor, the council members, the regional education director, all getting prescriptions for anxiety, insomnia, blood pressure. Their stress levels were skyrocketing right before Maria disappeared. Luisa's mind raced. She was applying pressure somehow. Antonio nodded. Whatever's in that box made powerful people very nervous. Together, they broke the seal on the container. Inside lay several folders of photocopied documents, their edges crisp despite their age, protected by the airtight seal. Land surveys, property transfers, and most significantly, evidence of document tampering. Certain signatures appeared forged, dates altered, property lines redrawn. She found proof the school land was being stolen through falsified documents. Luisa whispered, pieces falling into place. But why would anyone want that particular property? Before Antonio could answer, the pharmacy bell jangled downstairs. Excuse me, he said, disappearing down the stairs. Luisa continued examining the documents until she heard raised voices below. Peering down the staircase, she saw Helena Duarte engaged in an intense conversation with Antonio. Just a customer asking about festival history, Antonio was saying. My mother mentioned you were close to Maria, Helena replied coolly. Oh, given the anniversary of her disappearance approaches, I'd hate for old rumors to resurface. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Luisa quickly gathered the documents back into the container. Whatever game was being played had been ongoing for 20 years, and some players clearly didn't know it was about to change. What did Helena know? And why, after all this time, was she still working to keep Maria's investigation buried? Principal Regina Duarte's retirement party coincided with the second day of the Literature Festival. At 75, she remained a commanding presence. Her silver hair swept into a severe bun, her posture military straight, as she accepted accolades for 30 years of service to Villa Esperanza's education system. Luisa watched from the edges of the school gymnasium, nursing a plastic cup of lukewarm punch. The metal container from the library bench was now safely hidden in her apartment, its contents partially reviewed. The documents painted a disturbing picture. Systematic falsification of land records dating back decades, all centered around the school grounds and surrounding neighborhood. Quite the legacy, isn't it? The voice belonged to Pedro Oliveira, the elderly janitor now standing beside her in an ill-fitting suit jacket. 30 years as principal. Sees everything, that one. Forgets nothing. Were you here when Maria Elisa disappeared? Luisa asked, keeping her voice casual. Pedro's eyes darted nervously around the room. Was and wasn't. Called in sick that week. Stomach bug, he lowered his voice. But my boy was here, helping me out. He was just 16 then. Your son saw something? The janitor's weathered face closed like a shutter. Didn't say that. He took a long sip of his drink. But he's got his mother's artistic touch. Does the lettering for shop signs now. Good hand for copying things, too. Before Luisa could press further, Regina Duarte herself approached, her smile thin as she extended a hand. Our new literature substitute. How are you finding your former classroom? Her grip was surprisingly strong, her eyes evaluating. It brings back memories, Luisa replied carefully. I imagine so. Regina's gaze was penetrating. I understand you were one of Maria Elisa's special projects. She always believed you had potential. The way she said it made potential sound dangerous. I've noticed her influence on the town remains strong, Louisa observed. The literature festival, the community involvement in education. Regina's smile didn't reach her eyes. Maria had innovative ideas about teaching, not all of them practical. I trust you'll adhere more closely to the approved curriculum. The warning was clear, even 20 years later. As Regina moved on to other guests, Louisa felt a tap on her shoulder. Helena Duarte stood there, glass of wine in hand. Mother can be intimidating, she said smoothly. Don't take it personally. She's protective of the school's legacy. Including what happened to Maria Elisa, Helena's smile faltered momentarily. That unfortunate mystery is part of our history now. Best not to dwell on it. She lowered her voice. I understand you've been asking questions, speaking with Antonio Ferreira, examining old festival records. Louisa maintained a neutral expression. Professional curiosity. I'm trying to understand the educational culture I've stepped into. A word of advice? Helena leaned closer. Some doors are better left closed. For everyone's sake. She straightened her designer blazer. By the way, I've scheduled an evaluation of your teaching methods for tomorrow. Just standard procedure. As Helena walked away, Louisa felt a chill despite the gymnasium's stuffiness. The warning couldn't have been clearer. She was being watched. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, Louisa found herself drawn to Regina's office. The door was ajar, lights still on. Unable to resist, she peered inside. Regina stood with her back to the door. A filing cabinet drawer opened beside her. She was methodically feeding documents into a small shredder, her movements precise and unhurried. The calendar on her desk was open to January, with the upcoming retirement date circled in red. What records was the principal destroying just days before her departure? And what connection did they have to Maria's investigation 20 years ago? As Louisa quietly retreated, a floorboard creaked beneath her foot. Regina whirled around, her expression momentarily unguarded. And in that instant, Louisa saw not authority, but unmistakable fear. The municipal library's special collections room smelled of old paper and lemon-scented furniture polish. Here, in the quietest corner of the building, Ana Beatriz Silva had presided over Villa Esperanza's historical documents for nearly 40 years. Now, in her 70s, the librarian's hands showed blue veins beneath tissue paper skin as she carefully unlocked the archive cabinet for Louisa. Reference number J478, Ana confirmed, sliding out a large folder. Original land survey from 1932. No one has requested this in years. She hesitated, studying Louisa's face. Except Maria Elisa, of course. The mention of her former teacher's name was deliberate. A test. Louisa met the librarian's gaze steadily. That's why I'm interested in it. Anna's expression shifted, resignation mixing with what might have been relief. I've waited a long time for someone to continue her work. She closed the special collections room door and lowered her voice. We were friends, Maria and I, not just colleagues. The survey maps Ana spread across the table showed Villa Esperanza before most of its modern development. The school grounds and surrounding neighborhoods were marked as community trust land, property designated for public use in perpetuity according to the founding documents. Maria discovered something unusual about these parcels, Ana explained, her finger tracing the boundaries. In the 1970s, during the military government, records were altered. The land trust was dissolved without public notice. Ownership quietly transferred to private holding companies. Why would anyone care about this particular land? Ana smiled sadly. You're asking the right questions. Maria found geological surveys conducted by foreign mining companies in the 1960s. They discovered something valuable beneath Villa Esperanza. Mineral deposits worth millions, but extraction would require demolishing most of the town center. The pieces were falling into place. So someone's been trying to gain legal control of the land to sell mining rights. Precisely. But they needed all the parcels, especially the school, which sits at the center of the deposit. Anna's hands trembled slightly. Maria confronted Regina about it. The next day, she disappeared. You think Regina was involved? I know she was warned to drop the investigation. Anna's voice dropped further. I should have spoken up then, but I was afraid. Why tell me now? Because I'm dying, the librarian said matter-of-factly. Cancer, 6 months, perhaps less. And because yesterday I saw a surveyor taking measurements around the school grounds again. Anna reached into her desk and removed a small USB drive. Maria's research, digitized. I kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right moment, the right person. She pressed it into Luisa's hand. There's something else you should know. The night before she disappeared, Maria came here with a child. A girl, perhaps 7 years old, with Down syndrome. I'd never seen the child before. They used the library computer to book bus tickets. You think Maria fled with this child? Who was she? I don't know. But 2 days after Maria vanished, there was a small fire in the records room at the municipal hospital. All birth and adoption records from that period were destroyed. Anna's eyes held decades of unspoken regret. I've always wondered if Maria discovered more than just land fraud. Something personal that forced her hand. As Luisa left the library, the festival crowd swirled around her, oblivious to the secrets being unearthed in their midst. The sun was setting, painting the colonial buildings in blood-orange hues, while shadows grew longer across the town square. What connection did this mysterious child have to Maria's disappearance? And why, after 20 years of silence, were the powerful players in this conspiracy becoming active again? The classroom felt different now that Luisa knew its secrets. As her students discussed Jorge Amado's portrayal of Brazilian society, her eyes kept drifting to the chalkboard where she'd discovered the key. How many lessons had Maria taught here while carrying the burden of her dangerous knowledge? Among her students, one boy particularly stood out. Gabriel Oliveira, the janitor's grandson. 16 years old with serious eyes and a quiet demeanor, he participated rarely, but thoughtfully. Today, he lingered after class, approaching her desk with hesitation. My grandfather said you're asking about Miss Santos, he said, voice barely above a whisper. About what happened to her? Luisa's heart quickened. Did he tell you something? Gabriel glanced toward the door before reaching into his backpack. He removed a sketchbook and opened it to reveal handwriting samples, lines of text copied in different styles. My father taught me calligraphy, he explained. He used to practice by copying documents for people. Important people. The implication was clear. Documents like land deeds, property transfers? Gabriel nodded solemnly. He doesn't talk about it, but I found these in our attic. He carefully extracted several practice sheets, showing signatures being perfected through repetition. This one belongs to the mayor from 1989. This one to the county clerk. Luisa examined the forgery practice sheets, her blood running cold. Your father was involved in falsifying the land documents. He didn't know what they were for, Gabriel insisted. He was just a teenager doing calligraphy work for extra money. Principal Duarte arranged it. Regina Duarte hired your father to forge signatures? Through intermediaries. But yes, Gabriel's voice dropped lower. There's something else. The night Ms. Santos disappeared, my father saw her leaving the school with Principal Duarte. They got into Duarte's car together. It was the last time anyone saw her. The revelation struck Luisa like physical blow. All these years, Regina had participated in the investigation while potentially being the last person to see Maria alive. Had she been covering her tracks all along? Why hasn't your father come forward with this information? Fear, shame. He was 17, poor, with a baby on the way. Me. Gabriel's eyes reflected a maturity beyond his years. Principal Duarte provided opportunities for our family. Maintenance positions, Housing allowances. We've been taken care of. Bought off, Louisa translated. Protected, Gabriel countered, though his expression suggested he understood the distinction was semantic at best. As they spoke, Louisa implemented an activity from Maria's diary, having students create visual interpretations of literary passages. Gabriel and his classmates worked intently, their creative energy transforming the same old classroom into something vibrant and new. Several problem students, who normally disengaged, were now fully absorbed. Helena Duarte chose this moment to conduct her evaluation, standing stiffly at the back of the room with a clipboard. Her expression soured as she observed the unorthodox lesson, making pointed notes with sharp strokes of her pen. After class, Helena's assessment was cutting. This isn't the curriculum we agreed upon. These methods are reminiscent of Maria Elisa's experimental approach. The students are engaged. Their comprehension scores are improving. That's hardly the point. Helena's tone was ice. Consistency and structure are our priorities, not creative chaos. She placed a formal warning notice on Louisa's desk. Consider this an official reprimand. A second deviation will result in termination of your contract. As Helena left, Gabriel approached again, having overheard the exchange. Ms. Santos faced the same opposition. They tried to stop her teaching methods too. Why? My grandfather says people who think differently can't be controlled. And control is everything to people like the Duartes. That evening, Louisa carefully examined Maria's innovative teaching techniques documented in the diary. They weren't just effective pedagogical approaches. They were designed to develop critical thinking, to teach students to question authority and recognize propaganda. In a town where power depended on deception, such methods were inherently threatening. But who else besides the Duartes was involved in this conspiracy? And what had really happened that night when Maria left with Regina? Autumn arrived in Villa Esperanza, with russet leaves drifting across the town square and morning fog clinging to the river. The literature festival had ended weeks ago, but Luisa's investigation continued gaining momentum. Following leads from Maria's diary and the documents from Antonio's metal container, she'd identified a network of conspirators, prominent citizens who had profited from the fraudulent land deals. Today's destination lay at the edge of town, a small cottage abandoned for decades according to local records. The property had been registered to a holding company linked to the school's land parcel, but Maria's notes suggested it had once been her private residence, purchased under another name. Dried leaves crunched beneath Luisa's feet as she approached the overgrown structure. Vines had claimed the outer walls, and the front door hung askew on rusted hinges. Despite its deterioration, the cottage showed signs of deliberate design. Large windows positioned to capture natural light, built-in bookshelves now warped with humidity. The brass key from behind the chalkboard fit the locked back door perfectly. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of afternoon sun penetrating the grime-covered windows. The furnishings were sparse but intentional. A reading chair positioned beside a small wood stove, a writing desk beneath the largest window, shelves designed for a scholar's reference materials. The air held the musty scent of abandonment, undercut by the faint, lingering smell of jasmine, Maria's preferred perfume. She lived here, Louisa whispered to the empty room. This was her true home. In the main bedroom closet, behind a loose floorboard, Louisa discovered, following instructions from the diary, she found a sealed chest. The key from the chalkboard unlocked this too. Inside lay manuscripts, hundreds of handwritten pages that appeared to form an unfinished novel. The protagonist was a teacher in a small town who discovers corruption among local officials. But as Louisa read further, the line between fiction and reality blurred. Events described in the novel mirrored actual incidents that had occurred in Villa Esperanza after Maria's disappearance. Construction projects, political appointments, even natural disasters. How could she have known? Louisa murmured, tracing the prescient passages with trembling fingers. Deeper in the chest, She found a folder containing photographs. Most showed Maria with a young girl who had Down syndrome, the child Anna had mentioned. They appeared in domestic settings, reading together, gardening, celebrating a birthday. The girl's resemblance to Maria was subtle but unmistakable in certain angles. The shape of her smile, the expressive eyes. A document tucked among the photos confirmed Luisa's growing suspicion. Adoption papers for a child named Luz, processed 6 months before Maria's disappearance. The mother's name was listed simply as unknown, but a hospital reference number connected to records that had supposedly been destroyed in the mysterious fire. What she found next made her blood run cold. A cassette tape labeled Insurance with a note in Maria's handwriting. Only if necessary. Beside it lay an old portable tape player, batteries long dead. After purchasing new batteries from Antonio's pharmacy, Luisa returned to the cottage as evening approached. Rain began pattering against the windows as she pressed play. Maria Elisa's voice emerging from the tiny speaker, clear despite the recording's age. If you're listening to this, my precautions were necessary. I've documented extensive fraud concerning Villa Esperanza's land trust. The conspirators include Regina Duarte, Mayor Gomes, and State Education Director Fernandez. They've systematically falsified property records to gain control of land covering significant mineral deposits. I confronted Regina with this evidence on January 16th. She denied everything, but I saw the truth in her eyes. I no longer feel safe. By the time you hear this, I will have left Villa Esperanza with my daughter. Should anything happen to us, this recording and the accompanying documents will expose those responsible. I've entrusted multiple copies to individuals who will act if I cannot. The recording continued, detailing names, dates, and specific documents, a methodical accounting of 20 years of corruption. As the tape ended, Luisa became aware of headlights sweeping across the cottage windows. A car had pulled up outside. Had she been followed? And if so, by whom? The harshest winter in Villa Esperanza's recent memory arrived like a physical manifestation of the darkness Luisa had uncovered. Unseasonable frost coated the town square's cobblestones each morning, and residents huddled in cafes discussing the strange weather while wrapped in unaccustomed layers. In the teacher's apartment, walls covered with investigation notes and document copies, Luisa faced her most difficult moment. The car that had approached the cottage that autumn evening belonged to Antonio, who had followed out of concern for her safety. But his arrival had confirmed her growing paranoia. She was indeed being watched, not just by him, but by others with less benevolent intentions. "School maintenance crews have been asking about you," Antonio had warned, "taking unusual interest in your schedule, your movements. Helena has requested your personnel file 3 times in the past month." The school atmosphere had grown increasingly hostile. Teaching materials disappeared from her desk. Classroom thermostats malfunctioned during her lessons. Student assignments went missing after submission. The subtle sabotage carried an unmistakable message. Leave now, or things will worsen. Rain lashed against Luisa's windows as she stared at the evidence she'd accumulated. The USB drive from Anna. The land documents from the metal container. The cassette tape with Maria's testimony. The novel manuscript with its uncanny predictions. Combined, they painted a damning picture of corruption spanning decades. Yet proof of Maria's fate, whether she had escaped with her adopted daughter or met with violence, remained frustratingly elusive. A knock at her door startled Luisa from her thoughts. Through the peephole, she recognized Gabriel Oliveira, rain-soaked and agitated. "My grandfather's been taken to the hospital," he blurted as she opened the door. "Before the ambulance came, he insisted I give you this." The boy handed over a sealed envelope, damp from the rain. Inside, Luisa found a handwritten confession from Pedro Oliveira, describing his unwilling complicity in the land fraud scheme. "I helped them access records after hours," he had written in shaky script. Turned blind eyes to meetings I shouldn't have ignored. The maintenance job, the apartment for my son and his family, all payment for silence. But what I saw the night Maria left haunts me still. She and Regina argued in the parking lot. Maria had her daughter with her, suitcases loaded. Regina grabbed her arm. I couldn't hear the words, but Maria's face showed fear, then defiance. She pulled away, drove off. Regina made a phone call immediately after. Within an hour, police were searching for Maria's car on all roads leaving town. The confession continued, detailing how Pedro had overheard Regina arranging for roadblocks with the local police chief, who was also implicated in the land scheme. But Maria had never been apprehended. Her car was found abandoned at the bus station the next morning, wiped clean of fingerprints. I believe she escaped, Pedro concluded, and I believe they've been searching for her ever since. The same people who visit Helena's office late at night, the same people who ordered school renovations, halted when workers got too close to the original foundation surveys embedded in the cornerstone. They're still afraid of what Maria knew, and now they're afraid of you. Gabriel shifted nervously as Luisa read. There's more, he said. My father finally told me everything. He not only forged documents for them, he helped create Maria's new identity. What? Falsified driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, all for someone named Elena Martins. He never met the woman they were for, but the date matches Maria's disappearance. Elena Martins, Luisa repeated, the name igniting a new investigative path. That night, as wind howled around the eaves of her apartment building, Luisa nearly abandoned the search. The forces aligned against her seemed too powerful, the trail too cold after 20 years. Maria, or Elena, had clearly gone to extraordinary lengths to disappear. Perhaps exposing the truth would only endanger her anew. As Luisa gathered the documents, considering locking them away for good, her hand brushed against Maria's manuscript. It fell open to a passage underlined in faded ink. The truth does not cease to exist when ignored. It waits, patient as stone, for someone brave enough to give it voice. The words, Maria's words, rekindled Luisa's resolve. Whatever the risk, the truth of Villa Esperanza deserved to be spoken. For the town, for Maria and her daughter, and for herself, Luisa would continue. But first, she needed to find Elena Martins. Spring brought renewal to Villa Esperanza. Fresh green buds on the town square's jacaranda trees, the return of tropical birds from their winter migrations, and an energetic bustle as preparations began for the 20th Annual Literature Festival. For Luisa, the changing season paralleled a breakthrough in her investigation. Following the Elena Martins lead had yielded results. A woman by that name had taught literature at a small private school in Minas Gerais until retiring 5 years ago. Now, according to public records, she lived quietly in a coastal town 300 kilometers away. Photographs were scarce, but one grainy faculty image showed a woman with Maria's height and build, though her hair was different, her posture altered. Before Luisa could plan a trip to confirm this lead, an unexpected visitor arrived at her classroom after school. A man in his late 40s with calloused hands and Gabriel's serious eyes. I'm Mateus Oliveira, he said simply. Gabriel's father, the janitor's son. Mateus had brought a folder containing samples of his forgery work from 20 years earlier. I was young, needed money for my pregnant girlfriend. They paid well for calligraphy practice. I didn't understand what I was participating in until it was too late. His confession mirrored his father's, but with critical new details. Regina Duarte hadn't worked alone. She'd been directed by powerful figures from the state capital, including politicians and mining company executives. The land fraud scheme encompassed not just the school, but dozens of surrounding properties, all sitting above a rich mineral deposit. The night Maria disappeared, I was working late in the administrative building. Mateus continued. Regina came in, agitated. She was on the phone saying, "She got away. Yes, with the girl. The bus station security didn't stop them. They had different identification. She was terrified, kept saying, "If those tapes get out, we're finished." Tapes, plural? Louisa asked, thinking of the single cassette she'd found. That's what she said. Mateus hesitated. There's something else. 2 days ago, I was hired to renovate Regina's home office before she moves to her retirement condo. While removing bookshelves, I found this hidden in the wall. He produced a small address book, its leather cover cracked with age. Inside, written in Regina's precise handwriting, were surveillance notes, periodic updates on Elena Martins spanning 20 years. The most recent entry, dated just 3 months earlier, read, "Subject remains in coastal village. Daughter now works at local special needs center. No contact with former associates. Surveillance maintained quarterly." "They've been watching her all this time," Louisa whispered. "Not just watching, waiting." Mateus's expression darkened. The last page has a new entry. Property acquisition complete. Project approval expected June 2010. Final obstacles to be removed. The 20th Literature Festival is in June, Louisa noted, chills racing up her spine despite the spring warmth. There's more. Yesterday, surveyors were measuring the school grounds again. I overheard them discussing demolition schedules. Mateus leaned forward urgently. Whatever they've been planning for 20 years is happening now. And I think they're going to make sure Elena, can't interfere. That evening, as golden spring sunset bathed the town in warm light, Louisa taught her most challenging class yet. Using techniques from Maria's diary, she guided students through analyzing propaganda and identifying logical fallacies. Several parents had complained about her political teaching methods, but the students had never been more engaged. As the final bell rang, Helena Duarte entered with 2 school board members. "We've received concerning reports about your curriculum," she announced coldly. "Consider yourself suspended pending review." But as Louisa gathered her belongings, students began protesting. Gabriel stood first, joined quickly by others, until the entire class was voicing support for their teacher's methods. Helena's face hardened. "This inappropriate display only confirms our concerns about Ms. Cardoso's influence. Security will escort you from the building, Louisa. Don't return without board approval." Outside, as uniformed guards watched her departure, Louisa realized how effectively she'd been isolated. Her classroom, her connection to the school where everything had begun, was now off-limits. Whatever evidence might still exist, there was beyond her reach. But the students' spontaneous defense had kindled something powerful. Just as Maria had cultivated critical thinking and independence, Louisa had continued that legacy. The conspiracy might control property and power, but it couldn't easily erase the awakened minds of the town's young people. As she walked away from the school, Louisa made her decision. It was time to visit the coastal village and find Elena Martins, before Regina Duarte's final obstacles were removed permanently. The coastal village clung to steep hillsides facing the Atlantic, its colorful houses catching the late May sunlight. After a 6-hour bus journey, Louisa navigated narrow streets following directions from a local shopkeeper. The special needs center where Luz Martins supposedly worked occupied a cheerful building overlooking the bay. Inside, the walls displayed artwork created by the center's clients. Vibrant paintings revealing unique perspectives on everyday subjects. A middle-aged woman with Down syndrome arranged flowers at the reception desk, humming softly as she worked. "I'm looking for Luz Martins," Louisa said, heart racing. The woman smiled. "That's me! Are you the new volunteer coordinator?" Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The same expressive eyes Louisa had seen in the cottage photographs, now in an adult face. Before she could respond, a voice called from an adjoining office. "Luz, who are you speaking with?" The woman who emerged stopped abruptly upon seeing Louisa. Though her hair was now silver and styled differently, Though 20 years had softened her face with new lines, there was no mistaking those eyes, the same ones that had encouraged a young Luisa to question, to seek, to never accept simple answers. Maria Elisa Santos, now Elena Martins, stood before her. "It's you," Luisa whispered. "You're alive." Recognition dawned in the older woman's eyes. "Luisa Cardozo, my brightest student." Her voice held the same melodic quality, though now tinged with caution. "How did you find us?" The conversation moved to Elena's modest home overlooking the sea. Over coffee, with Luz excitedly showing Luisa her artwork, the two former teachers began bridging 20 years of separation. "I never intended to disappear forever," Elena explained, "only until I could ensure Luz's safety and secure the evidence. But when I learned how extensive the conspiracy was, how many officials were involved, I realized we might never be truly safe if I came forward." She described the night of her departure, the confrontation with Regina, the narrow escape using false identification papers secured through underground contacts, the constant fear of discovery during those early years. The teaching position here was a miracle. A small private school, no questions asked about my background. Luz thrived in this community. We built a life. Elena's eyes misted. But I never forgot Villa Esperanza, or the evidence I left behind. "I found some of it," Luisa confirmed. "The diary, the cassette, the documents in Antonio's metal box. But Mateus Oliveira mentioned multiple tapes." Elena nodded. "I made recordings of conversations with conspirators. Regina inadvertently revealed details about the mining company's plans when she thought she was persuading me to drop my investigation. The mayor discussed bribes on another tape. I hid copies in different locations. Insurance, in case anything happened to me." "They've been watching you all this time," Luisa said, describing Regina's surveillance notes. "I know. I've spotted them occasionally. Strangers who linger too long, cars that pass too slowly." Elena's expression hardened. "But what concerns me is why they're moving forward now, after all these years." Luisa explained the recent developments, the completed property acquisitions, the planned demolitions, the 20th Literature Festival serving as a parent cover for something more significant. "The mineral rights," Elena concluded. "Environmental regulations have changed. What was legally impossible 20 years ago might now be permitted with the right approvals and ownership structure." Her hands tightened around her coffee cup. "They're going to announce it during the festival, probably present it as economic development for the region." "We can stop them," Luisa insisted. "With your testimony and the evidence, it may not be enough. These people have spent 2 decades building their legal framework. They've purchased properties, falsified records, established shell companies. On paper, everything will appear legitimate." Elena's gaze turned toward Luz, who was watching seagulls from the balcony. "And they've demonstrated they'll do anything to protect their investment." The unspoken threat hung between them. Coming forward meant risking not just legal challenges, but physical danger. "There is one option," Elena said finally. "The novel manuscript." "I found it," Luisa confirmed. "It seems to predict events after your disappearance." "How is that possible?" "Because it's not fiction. It's a disguised record of what I uncovered about their long-term plans. Project timelines, property acquisitions, even the environmental impact they hope to conceal. I wrote it based on documents I discovered, conversations I overheard. If their current activities match what I documented 20 years ago, then we have proof of premeditation and conspiracy spanning decades," Luisa finished. "Enough to trigger a federal investigation regardless of local corruption." As sunset painted the coastal village in amber hues, the two women formulated their plan. They would return to Villa Esperanza together for the Literature Festival's 20th anniversary. There, with all conspirators gathered in celebration, they would present their evidence publicly, not just to local authorities who might be compromised, but to national media Elena had quietly contacted over the years. What neither woman could anticipate was that Regina Duarte had already learned of Luisa's coastal journey and was preparing countermeasures of her own. The 20th annual Villa Esperanza Literature Festival opened with unprecedented fanfare. Streets overflowed with visitors. Local businesses displayed their finest literary quotations, and the central plaza had been transformed into an elaborate open-air library. A stage erected before the school featured a banner announcing a special economic development presentation scheduled for the festival's final day. Luisa moved through the crowds alone, hyper-aware of being watched. Elena and Luz would arrive separately, staying hidden until the moment of revelation. The exhibition Luisa had organized, 2 decades of literary legacy, occupied the school's main hall, displaying photographs and memorabilia from all previous festivals. Regina Duarte had approved the exhibition personally, seeing it as harmless nostalgia. She couldn't know that hidden among the legitimate displays were coded references to the evidence Luisa had gathered, signals to journalists who had been given specific things to look for. "Quite the comprehensive history you've assembled," came Helena's voice as Luisa adjusted a photograph. "Mother is impressed by your dedication." 20 years deserves proper documentation," Luisa replied evenly. Helena's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed. Speaking of documentation, we seem to be missing some historical school records. Maintenance logs, property surveys, boring administrative details, really. But since you've developed such interest in school history, I wondered if you'd encountered them in your research." The threat was thinly veiled. Luisa maintained a neutral expression. "Nothing like that, I'm afraid. Just festival memorabilia." "Of course." Helena glanced toward the exhibition entrance where security guards had been stationed. "Enjoy the festival, Luisa. I understand the final day will be quite transformative for our little town." As Helena departed, Antonio approached under pretense of delivering festival programs. "They've increased security everywhere," he murmured. "The mayor's office has been shredding documents for days. Whatever they're planning, they're nervous." The festival's second day brought unexpected rain, forcing events under tents and into crowded indoor venues. Luisa used the weather as cover to meet with the journalists who had arrived from major national outlets. In the back room of Antonio's pharmacy, she presented copies of their evidence: the land documents, the diary excerpts, the cassette tape transcriptions, and most damning of all, pages from Maria's novel that predicted with unnerving accuracy the very development plans now being implemented. "This isn't just corruption," explained a journalist from São Paulo. "It's environmental crime. The mineral extraction they're planning would devastate the water table, potentially contaminating the river basin that supplies 5 downstream communities." "We'll need the original witness," another insisted. "Documents can be disputed. We need Maria Elisa Santos herself to testify." "She'll be here tomorrow," Luisa promised, "for the final presentation." That evening, as Luisa made final preparations in her apartment, a knock came at her door. Through the peephole, she saw Mateus Oliveira, expression grim. "Regina knows," he said when she let him in. "Someone saw you at the coastal village and reported back. They're preparing some kind of preemptive announcement for tomorrow, something to discredit any accusations before they're made. We need to warn Elena." "Too late. She's already on her way. She called Antonio an hour ago." Mateus ran a hand through his graying hair. "There's something else. Security has been increased around the presentation stage. Armed private guards, not just local police." Luisa's blood ran cold. "They wouldn't risk violence during a public festival." 20 years ago, I would have agreed with you. Now?" Mateus shook his head. "These people have invested decades in this plan. They won't let anyone stop them. Not when they're so close to success." Rain continued through the night, a steady drumbeat against Luisa's windows as she finalized their approach. By morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the festival's final day bathed in brilliant sunshine that felt like an omen. The central plaza filled rapidly as citizens and visitors gathered for the mysterious economic development presentation. On stage, Regina Duarte sat alongside the mayor, state officials, and men in expensive suits whom Luisa recognized from Elena's documents as mining company executives. Moving through the crowd, Luisa spotted the journalists strategically positioned with cameras and recording equipment. Antonio manning his festival first aid station, Gabriel and his father near the stage steps, all waiting for Elena's arrival. At precisely 11 o'clock, Regina approached the microphone. Citizens of Villa Esperanza, honored guests, today marks not just 20 years of our beloved literature festival, but the beginning of an exciting new chapter for our community. She launched into practiced rhetoric about progress and opportunity, jobs and investment. Behind her, digital displays revealed architectural renderings of a revitalized town center, one conspicuously missing the school and surrounding historical neighborhoods. As Regina prepared to introduce the mining company's CEO, a murmur rippled through the crowd. An elderly woman with silver hair had appeared at the plaza's edge, a middle-aged woman with Down syndrome holding her hand. Elena Martins, formerly Maria Elisa Santos, had returned to Villa Esperanza at last. Luisa moved quickly to intercept them, guiding them toward the stage as planned. Regina's voice faltered mid-sentence as she spotted the trio approaching. "And now," Luisa called out, voice carrying across the suddenly hushed plaza, "the true story of Villa Esperanza's past and its future, from the teacher who never stopped, believing in this community's right to know the truth." Silence enveloped the plaza as Elena Martins climbed the steps to the stage, her daughter's hand firmly in hers, Luisa following closely behind. Regina Duarte's face had gone ashen, her knuckles white around the podium edge. The mining executives exchanged alarmed glances while the mayor half rose from his seat, uncertain how to proceed. "Most of you won't recognize me," Elena began, her voice clear despite 20 years of absence. "But once, I was Maria Elisa Santos, literature teacher at our town school, before I was forced to flee to protect both my adopted daughter and evidence of crimes being committed against this community." Murmurs spread through the crowd as recognition dawned on older residents. Journalists moved closer, cameras focused on the unfolding drama. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Regina demanded, attempting to reclaim control. This woman abandoned her position decades ago. Whatever grievances she may have are hardly relevant to today's announcement. "On the contrary," Elena replied calmly. "Today's announcement is the culmination of what I discovered 20 years ago." She gestured toward Luisa, who opened a portfolio containing copies of their evidence. "A conspiracy to defraud the people of Villa Esperanza of their rightful community land. Land that sits above valuable mineral deposits these companies have coveted for decades." One by one, Elena outlined the scheme: falsified land records, forged signatures, systematic manipulation of public documents to transfer ownership from community trust to private entities. As she spoke, Antonio and the journalists distributed evidence, packets, to key officials in the audience, federal police representatives who had been quietly notified in advance. "This is absurd," the mayor sputtered. "These developments will bring prosperity to our town. Jobs, infrastructure improvements, and environmental devastation," Elena countered. "Contaminated groundwater, displaced families, the destruction of our historical center and school, the heart of this community." From the audience, Gabriel Oliveira stepped forward with a modern laptop. "With permission," he said, connecting it to the presentation system. The displays shifted from architectural renderings to Maria's manuscript pages alongside matching documents from the mining company's current proposal. identical in substance despite the 20-year gap. This is how I know their true intentions, Elena explained. I discovered their long-term plan before I disappeared. Every development since, every property acquisition, every zoning change, has followed exactly the scenario they drafted 2 decades ago. Regina lunged for the microphone. You have no proof these alleged documents came from any official source. This is slander, and you'll be held accountable. Actually, came a new voice from the crowd, we have proof of the documents' origins. Ana Beatriz Silva, the elderly librarian, was being helped toward the stage by 2 federal agents. Despite her frailty, her voice carried moral authority as she described her years of silent witness to the conspiracy. The plaza had become eerily quiet, hundreds of festival attendees frozen in collective shock as their town's hidden history unfolded before them. When Antonio played the cassette recording of Regina's damning conversation from 20 years earlier, her face contorted with fury and fear. You were warned to stay away, she hissed at Elena, abandoning pretense. You could have lived your quiet life on the coast. Why come back? Why now? Because some stories refuse to remain hidden, Elena answered simply, and because I never stopped being Villa Esperanza's teacher, even from a distance. She turned to address the townspeople directly. What happens next is your choice. Federal authorities have the evidence. The mining permits can be challenged. The fraudulent land transfers reversed. But only if you demand it. Only if you reclaim your community's right to determine its own future. As she spoke, Luz stepped forward, unfolding a banner she had created. Across it stretched a quote from Brazilian author Clarice Lispector. The truth is never found in absolute declarations, but in the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. The crowd's response began as a murmur, swelled to applause, and culminated in a thunderous standing ovation. Journalists pushed forward with questions. Federal agents moved toward Regina, the mayor, and the mining executives with official documents in hand. In the commotion, Luisa found herself standing beside her former teacher, now her ally and friend. You knew they wouldn't succeed, she said wonderingly. Even 20 years ago, you knew the truth would eventually surface. Elena smiled, the expression lighting her face with the same passionate intelligence Luisa remembered from childhood. I knew it would take someone asking the right questions, someone with an unquenchable curiosity and the courage to doubt even what seemed obvious. She squeezed Luisa's hand. I just didn't know it would be my most promising student. As federal authorities began detaining the conspirators, Elena addressed the gathering one final time. The literature festival was never just about books. It was about ideas, about giving this community the tools to read between lines, to recognize narratives shaped by power, to author its own story. She gestured toward the school building visible beyond the plaza. That's why they feared our teaching methods, not because we taught literature, but because we taught freedom of thought. In the days that followed, national media coverage transformed Villa Esperanza's story into a symbol of community resistance against corporate exploitation. The federal investigation expanded to include officials in the state capital. The fraudulent land transfers were suspended pending judicial review. Elena and Luz remained in town for the proceedings, staying in Luisa's apartment as they navigated both legal testimony and emotional reunions with old friends. The school board unanimously reinstated Luisa with an apology and an invitation to implement the progressive teaching methods documented in Maria's diary. One evening, as they sat on Luisa's balcony watching sunset paint the town in golden light, Elena posed the question that would determine their paths forward. The coastal school has offered me my position back, she said. Luz has her work at the center. We've built a life there." She paused, studying the town that had both forced her flight and welcomed her return. But Villa Esperanza will need dedicated teachers to rebuild after this scandal, to help the community heal and move forward. Luisa understood the implicit invitation. "You think we should stay? Both of us?" "I think education was always the most powerful force in this town's story," Elena replied. "More powerful than corruption or greed. It just needed the right teachers at the right moment." She smiled at her former student, now her equal. "And I think some stories deserve the chance to continue." As twilight descended over Villa Esperanza, the church bells chimed, calling residents to an emergency town meeting about their community's future. Together, the two teachers, separated by 20 years yet united by a shared purpose, rose to answer that call, walking side by side toward the plaza where their next chapter awaited. If this story left you as impacted as it did me, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment your opinion below. Each comment is like a new piece that can help unravel other mysteries like this one.